I think we might get going now because we're already quite a bit late. However, we are still going to have an hour for this session, I've been told. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this panel session on rural connectivity out in the Paddock. My name is Johanna Plante and I'm currently the chair of the Australian Communications Consumer Action Network, ACCAN, Australia's peak consumer body representing and advocating for the rights and needs of consumers in today's complex world of telecommunications. As you can see, I'm certainly no spring chicken and have been working in that world for very many years, far too many years. Starting in the early 70s as a very green young PMG, some of you will remember the PMG engineer, scaling masts and towers in the wilds of Australia's northwest. So I guess I've pretty much seen it all over the years since then from all sides of the fence: telco, government, regulator, consultant and now consumer, including 7 great years involved with Doug Anthony Sr., Lindsay McDonald and Eleanor Schultz from Woodner on the now somewhat infamous Networking the Nation. But there's been one constant over those 40-plus years, and that is the huge challenges we face in delivering adequate telecommunications services to people and businesses in rural, regional and remote Australia. As someone once commented during the 80s and 90s era of economic rationalism, when world's best practice was the mantra, unfortunately Australia doesn't actually have world's best practice geography or demography from the perspective of telecommunications service delivery. There's no doubt, however, that rural, regional and remote consumers and businesses have understandable and legitimate expectations, rights and gripes about telecommunications and the continuing gap between the city and the bush. And though things have to some extent improved over the years, that gap still remains, essentially underpinned in some cases by physics and in most cases by funding limitations. Whilst I'm sure many or most of you continue to have issues and complaints about what is and isn't available, I'd like us in today's panel session to try and leave the negatives of the past behind as much as possible and see if we can focus more on the possibilities and positives of the future. Today we have a unique opportunity to hear from 3 very senior people from some of Australia's biggest telcos about what the future might hold for rural, regional and remote consumers and farm businesses and the potential flow-on lifestyle and business opportunities and benefits presented. So let's use the session to find out as much as we can about what these 3 critically important organisations are working on, what some of their new offerings might be, and what that might mean for life and farming in the next decade. I now take great pleasure in introducing the 3 senior people who are the font of all that knowledge and will hopefully succeed in imparting some of it to all of us today. Firstly, I'll start off with Tony Bundrock, who's now the chairman of Activate Me. Tony has been the CEO of Australian Private Networks Proprietary Limited, Activate Me, since 2007. He's been involved in the industry for over 30 years and is an expert in satellite broadband technology. Next, we have Dan Lloyd, who joined Vodafone as Chief Strategy Officer and Corporate Affairs Director in 2014, with responsibility for company strategy, public policy, corporate affairs and inter-carrier issues. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Tim O'Leary, who joined Telstra in 2011 after 20 years in senior public affairs roles in the banking and oil industries. He is responsible for rural affairs, strategic community and reputational initiatives, Telstra's environment strategy and a whole lot of other corporate issues. Tim has 6 kids, a long-standing interest in anything Irish and barracks for the Collingwood Football Club. So let's now move to the substance of this panel session. We've been hearing a lot about the data drought in regional, rural and remote Australia, given the mobile coverage, data speed and capacity issues faced by all of you, and the exploding family, education and farm admin bandwidth requirements you have. And of course, on top of that, there's the Paddock and the growing adoption by farming businesses of Internet of Things, technologies, applications and business solutions. The Internet of Things promises major technology developments that have the potential to transform farming businesses and deliver significant productivity improvements, innovations and business opportunities. But this can only happen if we have the right connectivity in the paddock. Both Telstra and Vodafone are foundation members of the Industry of Things Alliance Australia and are intensely involved in the work being done by IOTA to accelerate innovation and adoption in Australia. Activate Me is the leading provider of NBN satellite services that definitely will be constituting an ongoing basic infrastructure for regional, rural and remote communications. So I'd like to kick off the Q&A session by asking each panellist to spend 4 or 5 minutes outlining how each of their companies is positioning itself and its offerings to accommodate farm business in terms of connectivity for both home-based family education and farm admin and paddock-based farm operations. So, who will I start with? I'll start with Tony, who is the closest to me.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna, and hello to everyone here. Found the debate just before afternoon tea quite interesting. I didn't vote, if anyone's interested. Wasn't too sure which way I was going to go, so I just sat out. Yes, look, I've been in the industry quite a few years. I started at Telstra's research laboratories, and my job then was looking at basically using satellite communications through to rural Australia. And you might remember AusSat was once became Optus, but had a big involvement there. Also been in Telstra's mobile business unit when you might recall they moved to introduce GSM with Vodafone and Optus as well. And of course the government had signed an agreement with Vodafone that they would close down the analogue AMPS network as part of the condition of Vodafone spending money on the licence. And of course they then discovered that there wasn't the coverage, that GSM didn't have the coverage. So that was a complete, how can I say it, just unacceptable for people in rural Australia. And so what we did is we pushed out CDMA. When I was working with Telstra, I was involved with that and engineered that in, and that then became the equivalent to what was original AMPS coverage. Since then, the technologies 5G and everything are being rolled out, and always that coverage has remained. However, whenever you draw your coverage diagrams for mobiles, there's always a line, and it only goes so far. And so we're looking at using satellite then to obviously provide the rest of that coverage across the land mass of Australia. Now, with Activate Me, as I said, I've been with them for about 10 years, and we have been very successful in the deployment of broadband satellite. We're a bit over the third of the market that with NBN Sky Muster. We've got about 28,000 customers, and we've installed all the way from on the east to west. We've been out on Lord Howe, we've been on Christmas Island, we've got installations. We've been up at just at the tip of Cape York with some of those Tiwi Islands, and then down southern Tasmania as well. Now, with coming back to the paddock side of it, the traditional broadband installation, whether you're in the city or on the farm, is the broadband access is there, and you traditionally use Wi-Fi. It's very rare that you'd plug a cable straight into your modem. So either it's your laptop, your iPhone, or your tablet is accessing that broadband with Wi-Fi, and that's usually installed inside the house, and there's not much coverage outside. But what we've been working on in the company is putting the Wi-Fi outside to get further coverage across a property, and then we also have technology that can daisy chain the Wi-Fi coverage to further extend it. And then on top of that, who's accessing? Because if you're on a farm, you might have some casual workers or such like, and we have to partition the usage. You're well aware that NBN has got restrictions on how much bandwidth you can use on a satellite. So then we petition that the homestead can have their bandwidth and the workers can have their bandwidth. Also, who's paying? We've got technology that it's like in your hotel room, you can buy a gigabyte or something like that just on a casual basis. So that's how we're trying to address the paddock side of it, as well as providing broadband to the house. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And we'll just go in order now. So I'd now pass on to Tim O'Leary to say a few words from Telstra's perspective.
Thanks, Johanna, and thanks very much for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. It's probably nearly 12 months since Telstra CEO Andy Penn and I caught up with Derek Schoen at the Orange Field Days, and we had a really good opportunity to have a chat around a whole broad range of issues, coverage, Internet of Things, issues of roaming, issues of service, a whole broad range of issues relating to the telecommunications. And at the end of the chat, I think Derek summed it up pretty pithily when he said, look, the key issue here is how do we get more and better coverage, and what are you going to do about it? And probably, I think, a month or so later, Derek had a piece in the Sydney Morning Herald, and I think it was slightly provocatively entitled "Show Us Your Money," and really, I suppose, challenging Telstra and challenging the industry around what we're going to do about more and better coverage. And that was an important provocation, and it was a couple of months later that Andy Penn, our CEO, in a sense responded to Derek and really outlined three key elements that I think is the long-term recipe for more and better coverage. The first of those is quite simply more money, more investment in the network. The infrastructure that we provide and the network we provide is, in terms of the traffic carried on our network, is increasing about 60 to 70% a year. So just imagine if that was a railway or a road and your traffic's increasing. So we need to spend more money, and Telstra announced up to $1 billion focused on rural Australia, focused on the Black Spot program, and we've got, I think we're building about 350 new Black Spot towers over the next 12 months. That we continue to focus a disproportionate amount of our investment on the tougher areas, that last 2% of the population. And a third element there around investment is how do we co-invest? What opportunities to work with others to co-invest? The second leg of the stool, if you like, in addition to more money, we need the best and the newest technology. We are moving towards getting 99% of the population covered by 4G over the next 12 months. I think we've upgraded 500 towers in New South Wales to 4G, and we have to prepare for 5G. And I think there are significant opportunities associated with 5G in that broad area of agri-tech. And then we've got to do clever things around how do we get the last drop of coverage out of the network. And I was talking to Annette Turner from the CWA just before around the little device called Selfie Go, a little device in your car, and just the transformation that has made in terms of accessing the coverage. One of the challenges with the phones these days is that they don't have an external aerial. Remember, the old ones had an aerial. As soon as you put this in a cabin, in a tractor or in a car, it cuts down the signal. And so we need to do new things. What is the next generation of Yagi antennas? And all of those sorts of things. So we need new and better technology. And And thirdly, we need good regulatory settings that promote competition and reward investment. And I think, they are the three things that, in our view, is sort of the three core elements of how we get that more and better coverage that Derek challenged us. It's a very challenging time in telecommunications. The NBN is a massive, sort of revolutionary activity, and I suppose as I travel around a fair bit in rural Australia, I've heard most of the Telstra stories and the challenges associated with that. So we've got work to do in partnership with NBN to improve those processes, enhance the service levels, but I think the challenge that Derek put to us is the real one. How do we get more and better coverage? Thanks, Johanna.
Thank you, Tim. And now our third speaker is Dan Lloyd from Vodafone.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I think you'd be disappointed if I didn't have a very different perspective on these issues from Telstra. Vodafone and Hutchison, so the two shareholders of Vodafone Australia, have invested over $15 billion in the 23 years since we first took up licences. This year alone, we're spending about $1.5 billion on our mobile network and on spectrum. We're building 74 mobile black spot sites as part of a broader regional expansion of 170 regional sites this year. The problem is that's always just going to be a drop in the ocean. And what I think we really need to do is look at opportunities to really make a fundamental step change in the way that we think about investing in regional Australia, investing as companies, and whenever the taxpayer invests. And for me, it comes down really to three things. The first one is enthusiastic infrastructure sharing and collaboration. And it just amazes me, virtually every other country in the world, the way they solve the challenges of regional infrastructure. So if you look at Canada, if you look at New Zealand, if you look at the USA, is through collaboration and infrastructure sharing, particularly through domestic roaming, so the ability of one operator's customers to roam onto another network, and through that paying significant sums of money, which in effect subsidise the regional network and allow expansion of coverage. So it's really quite alarming to me, actually, that Australia, the country that most needs efficient collaboration, efficient infrastructure sharing, is actually doing some of the least. And I think that's why we're really struggling once we get to the edges of the network. The second element is maximising the benefit of taxpayer investments. So Telstra alone has received nearly $2 billion of subsidies over the last 10 years, continues to receive under the Universal Service Obligation nearly $1 million a day. And we often get the question in regional Australia, where is that money going? So we got the Productivity Commission interested and have a look at it, and they concluded that there's a complete lack of transparency, accountability and controls around the Universal Service Obligation, and that in theory Telstra receives that money to subsidise fixed copper and payphones in regional, but appears to have shut down 50% of the payphones and 25% of the copper, yet continues to receive guaranteed funding of $300 million a year. There's a massive opportunity to rationalise that scheme and have a real public benefit from incremental investment, particularly in mobile networks. Then the third element is the role of NBN. We managed to convince NBN to provide a transmission service to us so that we could use NBN's network at very little incremental cost to them to connect mobile towers, allowing us to substantially expand the footprint. And just thinking about the next generation of NBN, how do we get NBN really focused on driving coverage? How do we get NBN really focused on helping businesses, particularly farmers? What role could they play, for example, in providing machine-to-machine? This isn't just some sort of fantasy. If you look across the ditch in New Zealand, this is exactly how it's playing out. Roaming in New Zealand was mandated in 2001. Vodafone provides roaming to the third operator in New Zealand. The government reformed their version of the USO to create a flexible fund that people could put proposals to subsidise infrastructure and to prefer any proposals that maximise realise the benefit through infrastructure sharing and collaboration. The 3 mobile operators a few weeks ago in New Zealand proposed to the government, with some of that funding, that they would jointly build, in the most efficient way, a single expanded regional mobile network offering a roaming signal to all 3 operators and emergency services and police, and supporting machine-to-machine, which would allow a 25% increase in land area coverage in New Zealand. So all of these elements have come together and are really delivering in other countries. I remain eternally optimistic that we can really change the debate here and figure out how we as an industry and working with government can collaborate to deliver more.
Thank you, Dan. So we've had 3 fairly different perspectives, and we'll continue to explore those now in some specific questions. So my next 2 questions, the first one's for Activate Me, and the second one will be for Vodafone and Telstra. They seek to drill down and focus more specifically on how each company intends to engage in servicing the whole farm and accommodating future Paddock connectivity requirements. Starting with Activate Me, whilst we certainly don't want this session to be consumed by Sky Muster and NBN issues, we can't ignore the first elephant in the room, the fact that there is disappointment and lots of noise out there about what Sky Muster has delivered or hasn't delivered to date. Much was promised, but it's fair to say there have been issues in the rollout that are clearly more than just teething problems. An additional challenge is how specifically the NBN and retail satellite service providers such as Activate Me might be looking at servicing the whole farm, and what satellite-based connectivity capabilities might be on the horizon. So over to you, Tony.
Yes, thanks, Johanna. Look, I'm not here to represent NBN or support them, but I have to say Sky Muster, and I get these feedback from our technical people, is performing extremely well compared to where it might have been 6 months ago. They can talk more detail, but I understand there's been a range of updates, like of their software and such like, over the course of the last 6 months, and we've seen a definite improvement. I think a lot of the problem was they tried for a rapid rollout because they were required to shut down that interim satellite service, and that caused a lot of problems with quality of install, adherence to timetables, appointments and things like that, which we saw a lot of, and it was a continual traffic between us and NBN to get things sorted. But as I said, if I go and talk to our network people now, they're quite happy with the performance of NBN, Sky Muster. Now that performance is actually pretty good in terms of what's available to the user with a speed of up to 25 megabit a second. And looking at the pricing and structure around NBN, that's a very, very competitive system that's being offered across Australia. Now, we've heard from the terrestrial operators such as Telstra and Vodafone wanting more and more base stations, more and more coverage, and that's fair enough. But as I said, there is always a limit where your wireless signal finishes, and that's where the satellite can come in. So any place in Australia, there's 101 NBN beams cover everything in Australia, including, as I said before, Lord Howe, Christmas. And so you can put a pin on a map, and wherever that pin is, we pretty well can provide service there. Now, of course, the traditional view is it's a house, a premise with a roof, power supply, and you can install that on the roof, and there's your broadband. But we've had, we being Activate Me, have gone into other areas. I've got a federal government contract to 300 Indigenous communities where we've installed NBN services or satellite services, and there's a cyclone proof, they're freestanding, they're solar panel driven, and they work extremely reliably, and we provide both broadband and voice services to those communities. We've extended that knowledge into providing to, let's say, the rural or the farming sector. So we see, as I mentioned earlier, get the Wi-Fi out of the house, maybe even get the satellite terminal out of the house and provide a broader area of coverage onto the paddock or the farm. We have developed in our technical area a standalone device which would be solar powered, using SkyMaster as the backhaul. It would have its own power supply, as I said, with the solar, backup battery, and installed Wi-Fi to get more coverage and not have a brick wall between you and the outside. On top of that, the Wi-Fi technology we use can daisy chain, and we provided to an Indigenous community, we did an installation with 5 Wi-Fi towers scattered around and 2 satellites forming the backhaul. So we put more capacity in by just duplicating the satellites. So this can be extended, not necessarily indefinitely, but we can get more coverage across the outside areas of a property using this technology. And if someone wants to go down to the back paddock and put a Wi-Fi service in there, we can do it. We've installed SkyMaster onto Rain Island for some, this is CSIRO turtle research, and that's a very isolated island, and they visit it once a month or something. And that works quite reliably. So we could extend that coverage into the paddock, use that term, with a standalone, could be just on a pole, could be solar powered, etc. We're quite flexible in what we can do. And we also would do the installation. We have trained installers that do it. We have trained engineers that do the design, and we've got some proven record out there with some Indigenous and other communities. So we're always very interested in how that can be used. We have currently an agreement with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries in Queensland. We're targeting 10 properties, they're mainly cattle properties, to try and get this sort of technology out there. They sort of differentiated to the business, to the household, and to the, might say, casual workers, or to data collection of one form or the other. And so we've interested, we'll work with the next 6 or 8 months with these properties to see how that's usable. And sometimes it's something as simple, their accounting system doesn't work too well over the satellite because of the delay. And we've got some ideas on how to tweak it, that it would work. They've told me sometimes they have to complete a form whenever they're moving cattle off property, and it's such a complicated form, I haven't seen it myself, but it times out when you try, and then you have to start again. We've got some ideas how to get around that sort of thing. So that's more in the detail of the operation of the property. But as I said, we can develop and provide solutions as required.
Thanks, Tony. Moving now to the second elephant in the room, which has already been raised, somewhat long in the truth elephant. But in contrast to going away over time, this has actually become even more important with the Internet of Things environment. Mobile and wireless internet infrastructures clearly have a central role to play in realising the opportunities of the IoT in regional, rural and remote Australia. Mobile and wireless internet availability, capacity, coverage and pricing will continue to be critical. The issue of rollout and enhancement has been widely aired and variously discussed on many fronts over many years. But there is an additional emerging issue. It appears to be a perceived shrinkage of coverage with the transition to 4G technologies, and a fear that coverage will further deteriorate with 5G. So I'd like to ask Vodafone and Telstra to each say a few words about how they are addressing the situation, the role they see for these infrastructures in supporting Internet of Things farm operations, and what specific Paddock connectivity services might be on the horizon. So I'll start this time with Vodafone. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you very much. So Vodafone, it's not really well known in Australia, but Vodafone is actually consistently ranked the #1 global machine-to-machine Internet of Things provider. We've got 5,000 people across the globe who are developing and deploying leading-edge machine-to-machine solutions that are driving efficiency and productivity gains right across all key sectors of economies, so logistics and transport, health applications, agricultural, whether it be soil moisture monitoring, or automatic triggering of alerts, or energy and water management. The problem at the moment, though, is Australia is really at risk of becoming disconnected from the global machine-to-machine ecosystem because it fundamentally depends on wireless, just the cost of connecting devices, and so many of the applications require them to move. It has to be a mobile solution. But again, without roaming or an open platform to provide those, then really there is one company that is the gatekeeper and will determine at its discretion the timing and the pace and deployment of bespoke homegrown solutions, rather than allowing a wave of global innovation which is already up and running in virtually the rest of the world to be provided almost immediately. And again, if you look at New Zealand, there is a very open ecosystem where global applications through domestic or international roaming work seamlessly across all of the networks. And my last point would be, back to this question of how do we just keep pushing the coverage out, particularly when it is true in the transition to 4G, there was a slight shrinking of the network. And I'd sort of pose it as a question. Do we really want multiple operators duplicating investments in the city and in regional towns? Or would we prefer to pool that money along with whatever government funding's available in order to maximise the benefit of that through a single efficient infrastructure that again is an open access platform? And if you look at the universal service obligation, $300 million a year, you could, using the average cost of the mobile black spots towers of about 750,000, you could build 400 new sites each and every year, and the average was about 260 square kilometres per site, 100,000 square kilometres of new mobile coverage each and every year. That's 1/8 the size of New South Wales. So I think, again, there's a huge opportunity, but at the moment, I really fear that we're heading very slowly in the wrong direction.
Thank you, Dan. Now, Telstra's turn.
Thank you. Well, let me make a couple of points here. Anyone who's travelled around regional Australia, it is very obvious that Vodafone have underinvested in the bush. That's not because there's some small minnow telecommunications company. Vodafone are one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world, much bigger than Telstra. There is nothing stopping Vodafone digging into their pockets and investing in regional Australia. The interesting thing is that, and it's interesting, that in their own home territory, because after all, Vodafone is a multinational telecommunications company, that when the issue of roaming was discussed in the UK, this is the quote from Vodafone. National roaming would harm the case for further investment in rural coverage. Why would any operator invest in providing better coverage for the benefit of a competitor? And this is what's at risk and what's at stake with the roaming discussion is a competitive marketplace, because competition will drive value. And I can tell you, Optus are investing massive amounts of money in regional telecommunications and directly competing with Telstra and everybody else in Australia. So, there is nothing stopping Voda. And the truth is that each business has a point of difference. Each of your businesses will have a point of difference. What Telstra has invested in their mobile network is network coverage. We disproportionately invest in regional areas, both for the benefit of our customers in the city and for the benefit of our customers in the bush. The truth is that Vodafone is focused on metropolitan markets. And what they want is an easy leg up. I'd like a free ride. We'd all like a free ride. But what we need are regulatory settings that drive competition, like Tony's team, out there finding a niche and driving investment. So that's the first point on roaming. Let me say something around the universal service obligation. The universal service obligation provides an incredibly valuable service to people in regional and remote areas. People value their landline. And if you want to get into a fight, tell people they should substitute it for Sky Muster. Now, we are the largest contributor to the USO. We contribute $140 million. That's 10 times what Vodafone contributes. Now, in 2012, we signed a contract with the Australian government to provide the USO service obligation. The pricing around that was framed by an independent economic model, and that became the contract. So that is the contract. Now, we have consistently said that if there is a better way to do the USO, we're open to that. But it can't come at it can't come at the cost of the customer experience. And at the moment, quite frankly, the NBN is not capable of providing the universal service obligation across the geography. So be careful what Vodafone would have you lose the landline with no alternative solution. So we're open to reform. The USO service obligation, as many people would know, is around the standard telephone service, as well as the phone boxes, the phone booths. And clearly the phone booths, with mobile phones and all of those sort of things, are much more underused. So we're open to that reform, but we're only open to that reform on the basis that it's no diminution of service to customers. Now, to come to your question, Johanna, look, the opportunities with IoT and agri-tech are quite phenomenal. It's interesting, we were in Armidale last month with the Telstra board. First time Telstra board had a board meeting in a regional location for some time. It's interesting, in Armidale, Armidale was the first place to get the NBN, and you can see how things have settled in terms of the change, the transition, the upheaval associated with people moving to the NBN. And there's a high degree of confidence in Armidale and surrounds around agri-tech, technology, coverage. We're at the University of New England Smart Farm and seeing some of the extraordinary, drones are very sort of public, but things like virtual fences and what you can do in that sort of areas. So where Telstra has some deep interest and expertise in Internet of Things, I think we're particularly excited around the possibility around 5G. 5G will broadly have the same coverage for voice and data, but the opportunity with 5G is for around narrowband sensors, that the coverage footprint is likely to be materially larger, and we think that has real implications for agri-tech. So we're doing a lot of work in the healthcare business around remote health and those sorts of areas, but I think this whole IoT area is one that is very, very exciting.
Thanks, Tim. I'm being told we've got 5 minutes. I thought we actually had an hour, whatever happened, so I'm not quite sure where we've got to. But I thought there was going to be an opportunity of about 15 to 20 minutes for people to ask questions, and I'll wait for confirmation of that. But in the meantime, I'd like to actually see if there are any questions. So starting over there.
Wayne Dunford from Parks and North Brewarrina, New South Wales. We haven't achieved a real lot today, I'm afraid, only a bit of competitive argy-bargy. I'd like a comment from the panel about the possibility, which is out there and about, of low orbit, low latency satellite saturation across the world, of satellites that are between 600 and 800 kilometres up, 700 or 800 of them, because I firmly believe that in rural New South Wales you are never going to get service out there with towers and short transmission wavelengths. Satellite is the answer, latency is a problem. So a comment from low orbit satellite system.
Maybe I'll get Tony to comment on that.
Yes, LEOs, as they're sometimes known, have been around one form or the other for a while. One problem I see with them is that they keep moving. So your little device, your handheld or your Earth terminal, has to track that satellite. If it doesn't, you have a low gain antenna, which makes life difficult to get much bits per second. It's just as simple as that. If you want to have 10 times the bits per second, you basically need 10 times the power. So you might have heard O3B is being put up by a range of companies, other 3 billion, and it hasn't been, I don't think, successful, not in this region, because of the expense of having these tracking antennas. I've heard in Africa it gets used more. So coming back to broadband and using LEOs, I see that as a technical problem. The concept's great, it gets around the latency issue, it also makes life coverage a bit simpler, but then you've got the laws of physics come against you if you have to track the satellite.
There was a gentleman about halfway down the room, or I think it is halfway down the room. Yes, that's correct. Thank you, Tony.
Ed Collis at Walgett. This all sounds very well, but I just want a bloody phone that works. Now, I live at Walgett, and right on my boundary fence is a whopping great Telstra microwave tower. And Telstra, in their wisdom, haven't put a mobile receptor on it. I'm therefore forced, because my landline went down and deteriorated in a flood, so Telstra gave me a Yagi aerial and all that sort of thing. So I get my data, 15 gigs for the princely sum of $80 a month, plus a minimum phone bill of $75 a month, plus all the hire and whatever. But at the same time, I've got a $115 a month Samsung phone that's also got 15 gigs of data and unlimited calls and a whole lot. I've got a duplicate system because this doesn't work at my house. Okay, my Yagi aerial actually barely works because I'm 32k as the crow flies from Walgett. And at 3 o'clock when the kids leave school and check their messages, it collapses. This is really giving me the willies. And I'll take a point you raised, Johanna, about this assumption that's been echoed by yourself and the people on the panel about funding limitations. My phone bill's about $600 a month. My phone and data bills. The guy that works for me, his is a couple of $100 a month. In the middle of harvest, we can have 30 mobile phones with the contractors and truckies, all trying to data roam and search and use the phone. I don't mind paying for a phone, but I really object to getting nothing for it. No one's actually said to me, Ed, would you make a capital contribution and put some money for it, and guess what, we'll give you a data package equal to, at the same price as my city cousins, which I would just love. But no, what you're saying to me, and you raised the point, Tim, about things like sci-fi, the self-fi boosters, we're actually in the bush making a massive parallel capital investment to make your crappy system work. Because we've got to put these, $1,000 a vehicle, or car kits. I've just gone up to this 8 and it doesn't fit in all my Bury car kits now, so I've got to buy new cradles for them. This is happening every 2 or 3 years. We are making a massive parallel capital investment. Why don't you just come to us up front? Now, you mentioned those. I mean, they're $1,000 a vehicle, okay? Are you going to provide that to me so the system you're selling me works? Because everyone in the city here gets provided that at Telstra's costs. I just want something that works. If I have to make a capital contribution, so be it. Just be up front and give me something that works. I'm old enough to remember when we had a 25-mile party line with 20 people on it with a single wire and an Ericsson wooden phone on the bloody wall. And we maintained that ourselves. At least if something went wrong, we could fix it. But at the moment, I feel dudded because I've got to make a Yagi aerial system investment that costs as much as my mobile system investment, because one won't work at my place, and if I go away, I need the mobile anyway, when I have, as I say, a bloody whopping great microwave tower that Telstra refuses to put anything on. And all my neighbours are in the same boat. You know, we're $600 to $1,000 a month customers, and we're treated, I like the word, consumer, we're treated like retail consumers. And we're really getting gnarly about this. For most of us, to make a $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 capital contribution with the current write-off laws and be given a value package from you guys would be great. Because what makes me cranky, and we've had many meetings with the Countrywide people, they treat us like a city retail consumer, like an 18-year-old down the street playing data.
Yeah.
If you put a mine in the back of Buggery, Telstra will talk to you with a different division and you'll put a bloody setup in there that works for 100 employees. And it'll work. I want that, and I'm not afraid to pay for it. I'm not afraid to pay for it because I'm paying for a parallel bloody support system anyway.
Tim, would you like to answer the question?
So thank you. I hear your frustration, and I wish. I really wish that I could fix that, and I'm really happy to have a chat outside with Mike Marram, who's responsible for that area, and get a little bit more detail on that tower and see what we can do. But what the point around co-investment, I think, is a very real one, and it's an important one, because the truth is that as we get further out, the geography becomes more challenging. And last month, 6 months ago, we opened up fibre to Birdsville, a really remote location, and through co-investment with state government, co-investment with federal government. We've done co-investment with mining companies. We've done co-investment with state governments. I think we can do co-investment with farmers. And in fact, we had conversations last week with Queensland Farmers Federation to see what might be possible in the cotton area. So I think that is one of the ways that we can take the conversation forward. I really want to fix your service issues, and if we can do something about that, I will genuinely try and help you.
Thank you, Tim. Dan, did you want to make any comments?
Look, I think the point about the duplication of the system is a very, very fair one, and I'm sure you've also got nearby a large number of NBN fixed wireless towers, which are also a parallel duplicated investment. And of course, the decision was made for one reason or the other not to use the NBN fixed wireless footprint to also provide mobile. So there's this whole series of decisions that fragment and duplicate rather than maximising the benefit from private investment and government investment. So that's why I think we need a different model.
Thank you, Dan. Now, we've got another 5 or 7 minutes. Just a quick... Oh, sorry, I didn't give you a chance.
Look, I know a guy has put a mobile network into our mine site using spectrum he's leasing from Vodafone. Yep. So it's a little standalone service, and obviously there is capital contribution from the miner, but that can be done. And, if you've got a group of people that want to get involved with that, it may be a possibility.
Great, that's a positive way forward. We've got a few more minutes for questions. I think there was one other person down there and then this gentleman here. Who was the person down the end there that... Oh, that gentleman, yes.
We're going. Tony Quigley from the Trangie Narromine branch. We're going to turn that around. Particularly one for Tim here, though. Telstra's going to take a bit of a flogging today, but it's the company that tells us they cover the most of rural Australia with their coverage. I've got a story similar to Ed's. I've got a Telstra exchange on my farm that's already got optic fibre, power, a site, and a 30-metre tower. I offered that site to Telstra for 20 years rent-free if they'd put a mobile cell on it, and they declined. They firstly told me there wasn't enough, they'd done a study and there wasn't enough demand for it. So I asked if I could see the study. Study doesn't exist. They later told me that there would be no expansion in Telstra's footprint, full stop. If we haven't got mobile coverage now, we never will. I don't think that's acceptable. What's your opinion?
Well, what I can say is that we are spending more money than we have ever before on our mobile network. We are building, I think it's about 7 towers a week for the next 12 months or plus. Our CEO announced an extra $1 billion into our network. I wish that there was a simple solution to say, yes, you can have it, because but Telstra is doing, we are building more, we are spending more, and we are trying to get, to Derek's point, more and better coverage. And I think that we have to continue to look at innovations around that co-investment. We have to look at innovations around technology, and I think they're the long-term fixes. But I'm happy to take the specifics outside on the exchange.
Now, we're rapidly running out of time. There are two more people here that want to ask questions, starting with the gentleman and then finishing with the lady.
Yes, Peter Wilson. I'm the treasurer of this association, but I'm also from Trangie, up close to Mr Quigley. And I can vouch for his frustrations in relation to our telephone coverage. But I do acknowledge it's a lot better than the party line that we had right up until 1987, which was only 3 years before the advent of the internet. So I accept we have advanced. But what I'm still very puzzled about is you refer to co-investment with government and other people, but why will you not co-invest with other phone companies to avoid the duplication? Surely that is the simple answer to expending the coverage into what you refer to as the challenging geography.
Well, so quick answer, Tim.
And look, this is the issue of there is nothing stopping competitors putting their equipment on our towers. There is regulated access to towers. When we build the mobile black spot tower, we make room for other operators. There is regulated access to backhaul. But what we object to is a bit like you've got a paddock and someone comes in and says, well, I wouldn't mind, half of that paddock.
That's what the kangaroos do.
So that's right. Well, that's right. But so we don't object to co-location. We don't object to sharing, but what we want is a competitive marketplace and not to provide a leg up to, frankly, another telco who's not interested in the bush.
Actually, could I just ask Dan a quick comment and then the final question, and then we have to finish.
Yep. So I think one of the key points is Telstra likes to say how much it is investing, but again, $2 billion of taxpayer subsidies over the last 10 years and continuing subsidies just under the USO of nearly $1 million a day. In that same 10-year period, Vodafone has had $40 million of subsidies. So the coverage that you see is largely the result of taxpayer funding rather than any individual company investing. This point on co-location really starts to drive me mad. That is the least efficient way of sharing infrastructure. You duplicate everything except the physical tower. 2 sets of radio access equipment, 2 sets of power, 2 sets of transmission. It necessarily limits the amount of it that you can do. Again, the New Zealand model, single infrastructure, single power, single radio access network, allows the money that you put in go further and further and further and further. And I really question this notion that there's not enough money available for Telstra to invest more. Telstra likes to say Vodafone's a much larger company. In the last financial year, Telstra's free cash flow was 5.9 billion Australian dollars. Vodafone's was about 1.5. Vodafone, with 500 million customers, earns free cash flow of about $4 per customer per year. Telstra keeps $254 of cash per citizen in Australia per year. So I'd really question this notion, A, that there isn't enough money, and B, that we should continue to fragment and duplicate and use the least efficient forms of investment.
Actually, maybe we should have never. Maybe we should have stayed with the single government-owned monopoly. Sorry about that, guys. Well, really, that's what I mean, in a sense, a single infrastructure. Yeah. Anyway, I won't go there. I've been around for too long. And the lady, please.
Sarah Thompson. You get me? Sarah Thompson from Catalyst, from the Cooler branch. My issue is that I'd like to see a commitment. I'm focusing it to Telstra because you're the organisation that we deal with in our area. Is the frustration we hear so much of is that when we try to find advice about what is the best mechanism for us to get the technology into our houses and into our farms, you don't have it. I drive 100 kilometres to talk to someone in a franchise shop who tells me something. I drive 100 kilometres another direction in a franchise shop who tells me something completely different. I come to Sydney and go to the business centre to try and find some information. I get further advice. None of them have solved the problem that I have. So my husband actually has coined a phrase called Telstra-induced disorder. And I think that if you spoke to everybody in this room that deals with Telstra, particularly on complaints and customer service issues, you would find that they would agree with that. You have to take a Panadol to make the call. So if you can't do anything to resolve the issues between the mechanisms, whether it's Vodafone, Optus, Telstra, NBN, whatever it is, could you please make a commitment that something within your organisation will happen that will allow us to have a call to someone who will then advise me what is the best infrastructure for me to put on my farm to get the services that I need to do my business and to communicate with my family?
Thank you. It sounds a little bit like alternative facts. Go on.
So I accept that criticism, as I think it is real, it is genuine, and it's consistent as I travel around Australia. We have a network of area general managers that are designed to assist here, but this is genuinely a work in progress, and I don't want to pretend it's true. I accept that. And my commitment is that to work within our organisation to address that and make the necessary changes. I think there are ways that we can partner with New South Wales farmers to make that easier. We're certainly doing that with a number of the farming organisations, but I take that criticism on the chin.
Thank you, Tim. Look, we are going to have to wrap up there. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for your questions and for the lively debate, but I'd like to finish by asking you all to join with me in thanking our three panellists, Dan, Tim and Tony. Thank you.